Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our webinar titled Cancer Clinical Trials, What to Know and Who to Ask. A special welcome to our speakers, Dr. Dishan Herath, Ms. Marion Leschke and Mr. Peter Curry, who have joined us today to help us learn a little bit more about clinical trials and the importance of clinical trials in the delivery of optimal cancer care. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands we are meeting on today, those of the Boon Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and also pay our respects to their elders past and present, as well as all Aboriginal people participating today. Tonight's webinar will run for approximately 1 hour. The aim of the webinar is to increase your understanding about clinical trials and the importance of clinical trials in cancer care. Together, our three presenters will discuss what clinical trials are and why we continue to conduct clinical trials to advance cancer care, what is involved in a clinical trial at the site level, including the role of a research nurse, and share their own experiences and learnings participating in cancer clinical trials. Each of our speakers will also participate in a short panel discussion at the end of their presentations, with time at the end for live Q&A. While we will be aiming for a 7 p.m. finish, we are happy to stay later than this to accommodate everyone's questions, so stay posted for updates as we proceed. If you do have any connection problems throughout the webinar, please contact the relevant number listed for support. A recording of this webinar will also be made available on the Victorian Cancer Trials Link website, and any relevant links, resources or frequently asked questions will be circulated following the presentation. For those of you tuning in who are not familiar with the Victorian Cancer Trials Link website, it is an online and mobile platform that allows people affected by cancer and their clinicians to search for cancer clinical trials in Victoria. You can use the platform to search for a clinical trial by inputting information about you, your diagnosis and your treatment history. As well as information about specific clinical trials in Victoria, the website also contains a suite of general information resources to help you learn more about clinical trials. This includes access to Cancer Council Victoria's 13-1120 nurses, a suite of 5 videos that outline the different patient experiences of being treated in a clinical trial, including Peter's, who you'll be hearing from today, and a pilot telephone peer support program called Trial Connect. All in all, the website aims to provide you with reliable information that can help you start a conversation about clinical trials with your doctor and make an informed decision about whether or not you should participate. As an extension of this information, I'll now pass you over to Dr. Dishan Herath, Head of Cancer Services at Western Health and Medical Oncologist at Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre, who will take you through the what and why of cancer clinical trials. Thank you, Dish.
Thanks, Christy. So I'll just get right into it. So the first thing I want to talk about is why do we perform clinical trials? And really the ultimate aim is to improve outcomes for cancer patients. And I guess the two main things we want to look at are if new treatments will improve survival, so either cure cancers where they otherwise wouldn't have been cured, or at least extend the amount of time that people have living with their cancers. And the second aim beyond that would be to control their symptoms, so to improve symptoms such as pain. The features of new treatments that are assessed by clinical trials are the safety, so we want to ensure that new treatments are going to be safe and that we've assessed them for side effects, because we really won't know that information until it's been assessed in this sort of manner. And also effectiveness, which goes back to those first points I made about helping patients to live longer and to reduce their symptoms. In terms of the progression of clinical trials, so if we think about the way, for instance, a new drug might be introduced, when drugs are created in a laboratory, a lot of them undergo laboratory testing and animal testing and really never proceed beyond that point, that they never show enough activity in the laboratory that indicates that they would be suitable to move into human testing. But the promising drugs do move forward, and in the cancer space, that first phase of testing is called phase 1 clinical trials. And I'd like to just acknowledge that this image is taken from the Cancer Institute New South Wales website. So phase 1 trials are really looking at side effects of the new medications. We obviously hope that patients will get benefits as well, and nowadays the designs of the trials are such that we actually have a significant hope that patients will get benefit, but the primary aim of this phase of testing, traditionally in a smaller number of patients, is to look at side effects. Moving on to phase 2, that's when we're testing a drug in one cancer type. So for instance, there might be a phase 2 trial of drug X in lung cancer, a phase 2 trial of drug X in breast cancer, and so on. Then, if the drugs look successful in the first 2 phases and is tolerable, it's moved into phase 3. And phase 3, where it's really testing against the current standards. So you'll know what your current standard therapy is, say for breast cancer that's spread, and you'll have a defined group of patients where you test the new treatment against the current treatment. Phase 4 is really essentially what's called post-marketing studies. So these are essentially, the drug's already been proven and often is looking at being licensed, and these are looking at expanding the use of the drug. Now, what's interesting is that there has been some change in this. You'll see from the diagram that phase 1 is pretty small compared to phase 3, but now there are a number of phase 1 trials with much, much larger numbers of patients where they're assessing different outcomes as well as side effects. So this is something that has changed since, say, about the year 2000. So because we're looking at things such as the side effects of the medications, it is important that we protect the participants in clinical trials from harm to the greatest extent possible, and that patients and their carers can feel confidence in terms of participating in clinical trials. So the trials themselves and the doctors and the nurses involved in trials must adhere to an international standard that's known as Good Clinical Practice, or GCP. So staff participating in clinical trials must complete GCP training before they're involved in cancer trials, and they must update that training to show that they're still current. And there's also hospital ethics committees and research officers at hospitals monitoring adherence to good clinical practice. So these are some of the mechanisms by which patients are protected. Apart from the hope that the trial will produce a drug that's going to help the particular patient that's gone into the trial, there are other reasons, of course, while patients go into clinical trials. And I think, Marion and I are always very impressed that a large number of patients will participate in a trial really with the primary aim of helping others in the future. So it's cancer patients are very altruistic. They often will be thinking of others before themselves. And this is actually a significant reason why many patients choose to go into clinical trials. Another benefit that patients get in clinical trials is that there's staff such as Marion that are keeping a close eye on them above and beyond the normal staff that would be looking after patients. And there are benefits to that process, though, as Marion I'm sure will discuss, it does involve some extra time commitment as well, but there's certainly some benefits there. I think the third reason is also really important, which is hope. So that patients, even if they think the odds of success are low, many people really want to be doing something. They don't want to be, sitting around doing nothing if there's no other good treatment options available. So hope's a really important reason, I think, why people go in for clinical trials. So there are some issues to discuss with clinical trials. One of the things that comes up quite a bit is this idea of the placebo treatment, which is essentially that patients could be getting, rather than the real drug, a sort of sugar version or, just a water version of the drug that's not the real drug. And it's really important to understand that those patients getting that treatment are still getting the best available standard treatment. So the placebo is always going to be on top of the best available standard treatment. And the reason why we do compare this to the new drug is because we really don't know at the time of testing whether the new drug is going to be any better. in terms of its side effects and benefits. So even though this is a difficult concept for people to get their heads around, it is really important. Most trials do only accept very fit patients, and this can be quite distressing for patients when they're trying to look for a new treatment or for a clinical trial, and they find that they may not be suitable because of, they may not be strong enough essentially to participate. And that's really because of the number of visits involved, the unexpected side effects, so the entry criteria are quite strict for a lot of trials. One of the things that I think bothers me is this, that the information documents have now become so long and so focused on explaining everything that could possibly happen that it makes it very, very difficult to understand the documents. And certainly whenever I'm participating in the ethics committees around this, I look for opportunities to try and cut them back rather than add to them. But this is an ongoing issue. And, related to that is that some groups of patients could miss out on clinical trials, so particularly patients with a primary language other than English. And you can imagine if you've got a long document to read, that becomes very hard if English isn't your first language. Cancer Council Victoria is doing active work to try and improve this for patients. So in conclusion, all proven cancer treatments being used today are really available because patients in the past participated in clinical trials. They may not have been the exact type that we use today, but that's really how we got to where we are now. So clinical trials benefit the patients who are directly involved as well as those in the future. And we really want to thank patients who participate in clinical trials because they are taking a risk. There's the risk of side effects, and they are helping others in the future. So we really want to thank all of the patients who've participated in clinical trials.
Thanks, Dish. Now that we know a little bit more about what clinical trials are and their significance in improving outcomes for people affected by cancer, I'll pass over to Marion Leschke, Manager of the Parkville Cancer Clinical Trials Unit, to explain what is involved in a clinical trial and some of the considerations that you might have around clinical trial participation.
Thank you, Christy, and good evening. I wanted to start with one of the questions I get asked most often by people who phone in to our institute is, how do I find a trial for me, and should I consider one? We have a mantra at the Parkville Cancer Clinical Trials Unit and the associated hospitals that trial medicine is good medicine, and Dish has already explained why that might be the case. So we would say, no matter where you are in your cancer journey, ask your oncologist if there's a trial for you. And if not your oncologist, your surgeon or even your general practitioner, they can help you find a trial for you. And finding the right trial and finding the way into finding about trials is very important. One of the things that can help you do this is things such as the Cancer Council website. But as Dish said, there is a warning that every trial has very stringent entrant requirements. And you may get very excited that you find a trial that looks like it's for you and your cancer, but then you find out about it and you may not actually meet those entrant requirements. And that can actually be very disappointing, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't look again. And every time you see your doctor, I always think the last question you should ask as you leave the room is there a trial for me? If you're considering a trial, there are some things that I always go through with patients. Trials usually have more visits than standard care. And this might be important to you if you're trying to run a business or look after your family. Knowing that not only are there more visits, but their trials tend to be less flexible into how we can make the arrangements. In normal treatment, we can often make an appointment a couple of days later, but in a trial, it may specify that we can only treat on a certain day. And that makes it very hard if you're trying to live a normal life. It shouldn't put you off, but these are important things to know. People always ask, how long will I be on the trial for? Well, most trials can run for years nowadays. And worst of all, if they're successful and you're doing well, you are going to be on it for years and years. This may not seem like a problem when you first start, but if you're getting your trial appointments around your normal life, the longer it goes on for, the more difficult it becomes. We also normally cannot transfer trial treatments between one institution and another. So if you travel to a major regional metropolitan site, such as Melbourne, for a trial, but actually live 3 or 4 hours away. We can't transfer your trial treatment to a local hospital. So wherever possible, try and choose a local hospital. And many of our regional hospitals now have very good trial programs. And all care is best delivered close to your home and where your friends and family are there to support you. And I think if I have one message I get to give today, that would be my most important one. Look locally, because that's where you'll get the very best care and support. Getting onto a trial, you need a formal referral from your oncologist or your GP or a surgeon to the hospital that's actually running the trial. The more information that we can be given when we get that referral, the better, because we need to match the information about you to the trial. It is very difficult to have someone travel many hours to see us only to discover that we didn't have the right information and they won't be eligible for the trial that we have on offer. You'll usually be invited to a preliminary visit to discuss treatment options, which would and should include a discussion of standard treatments, not just the trial. When you come to talk about a trial, we actually need to make sure that you know all the other options, not just the trial, because we're not salesmen. Although we want people to be on trials, we also want you to know everything that's available for you. Usually at that meeting, you'll meet the doctor involved in the trial, or one of them, and the nurse or the study coordinator running the trial. The difference between a research nurse and a study coordinator is one is a nurse, a research nurse who's usually got a clinical background in oncology or in hematology, who's chosen to transfer into running trials. A study coordinator may be someone from another allied health profession, such as a pharmacist or radiotherapist, or even a scientist who's previously worked in the lab, who also help coordinate trials. And you'll see both of these names often on people's badges, and I know people get confused by them. Whenever you come to talk about, I would say, any treatment, but particularly about a trial, bring a friend, bring 5 friends, bring your mum, your dad, your grandma, your children, I don't care. Bring everyone you need, because when the discussions have a lot of information, and I don't know about you, the moment I hear something I don't like, I stop listening to the rest of it. So if you've got several people in the room, they can listen to the rest of it on your behalf, and you've got people to discuss it with afterwards. So always bring a friend, even if you don't have too many. When you're getting onto a trial, I would recommend involve your family. People often want to protect their families from their illness and other things, but your family are going to be part of your trial as well. And the more they're involved, not necessarily to take over, but the more involved they are, the easier it will be for you. And you all need to be informed about what a trial involves, the visit schedules, any procedures we're going to do, and what we currently know about the side effects. One of the things we'll always tell you when we're talking about a trial is we know these things about the side effects, but we don't know everything. So there may be things that happen that will surprise us, and our job is to make sure we look after you. We also need to let you know whether there's any money in the trial to assist you with travel and accommodation. Most trials do have some money if they're run from a pharmaceutical company, but many of the trials we run, particularly at big centres, are what we call academic trials. They're based on grant money that doctors have gone out and got, and they often have very, very little money. So often in those trials there may not be much money to help with travel and accommodation, but we can always link people in with other sources to help you get accommodation, such as the Cancer Council and the Leukemia Foundation, Bizard Foundation, etc. Dish mentioned the information forms we have to give you. It's laughingly called a patient information and consent form. It is minimal nowadays, about 27 pages long. It is an awful document, and I think everyone who works in trials hate patient information and consent forms, and everything we do to try to make them better just seems to make them longer. It will be given to you in a hard copy form which you can take home. The doctor and the research nurse should discuss it with you, but I would recommend take it home, read it with your family or friends, take it to your local doctor or your own oncologist to discuss. And most importantly, take a big red marker and scribble questions all over that copy so that when you come back, you won't forget to ask the things you wanted to do. Come back and discuss it at the next visit and with the study team again before signing it. We actually never let you sign it away from us because it's one of the legal requirements of a study that we witness you signing it and you witness us signing that consent form. If you can't read English, then the study team can arrange an interpreter to help. But obviously, if you can find someone in your local community who can help you read it, it gives you more information. On trial, who's going to look after you? Well, as Tish said, it's a whole team of people who look after you. We're normally trying to make one research nurse or a study coordinator primarily responsible for you to be your guide and main carer through a trial. But it may change. You know, if a trial goes on for years and years and years, that person may have had 4 children by the time you finish the trial. So you may get different people. But our main aim is that you've got someone who you can always contact. That person's there to help you with the study arrangements, which can be confusing, and be your main point of contact between both when you're in the hospital and on the phone. And our job is to be able to give advice, and you will always have a number where you can get advice whenever you need it. Being on a trial. Most trials have lots of visits, so you need to be prepared for that. Almost every visit takes a bit longer than was planned. We tell you it's half an hour, it's an hour. We tell you it's 2 hours, it's 4. Some of that is because things happen to you on a trial. You know, maybe you get a rash and we want a doctor to look at it, and the doctor's busy somewhere else and's got to come. The word just a minute means a lot, very different in a hospital setting than in the real world. So be prepared to stay longer for your visits. So if you've got to pick up a child from school, think about who could take that responsibility. We try to manage those things, but it's not always possible. Being on a trial is a joint collaboration between you as a patient and us as your care team. If we can only help you when we know that there are things wrong, so you have to tell us everything. I always say, if you don't tell us, we won't know. So help us by telling us everything to the study team. The trial team are skilled clinicians who are there to help and give you advice. But it's really lovely if when they give you advice, you actually take it. We do love people not to go off onto other treatments while we're on trial, because sometimes the other treatments you might take from complementary therapies or dietary things may affect the treatment. Just talk to us about them, and then we know whether that's going to interfere with the main trial. If you want to stop the trial, a patient can withdraw from a trial at any time, and you don't even have to tell us why. But it's much better if you've got problems on the trial or you've got concerns, tell the trial team really early. Be open and frank with them, and they'll be able to help you. Most trial teams will ask you why you want to withdraw. Really, you don't have to give a reason, but it does help us know why you want to withdraw to try and improve things for future patients. So in summary, I would say always ask about trials, and then work with your team to understand what that trial will involve and to receive the very best care that's possible. Thank you.
Thanks, Marion. It's now my pleasure to introduce Mr. Peter Curry, a Cancer Connect volunteer and previous clinical trial participant, who is going to share his experience and advice participating in a clinical trial. Thanks, Peter.
Yeah, thanks, Christy. Hello, everyone. My name's Peter Curry, and I'll speak to you about my experience, excuse me, of being a patient involved in a medical trial. When I was diagnosed with stomach cancer in August 2009, it was a complete shock to myself and my family, and it was life-changing. Participating in a medical trial was not even anything I considered or was not on my radar. I was too immersed in the initial shock of actually being diagnosed with cancer. And as I said, it was sort of the furthest thing from my mind. Not long after my diagnosis, I was approached to join a medical trial, and the medical trial was researching stomach cancer in Australia, the UK and the USA, and the purpose of the trial was simply described to establish best treatment and provide a Western approach or a universal approach for treatment for stomach cancer. It was clearly explained that participation was purely voluntary. There was no monetary or any other incentives to join the trial, and I was informed that the length of the trial was for a period of 5 years. So for myself, it was really about free choice. As I mentioned before, it was clearly explained that I was free to choose whether to participate or not. One of the things they really emphasised was that I could withdraw from the trial at any time and for any reason. And as Marion mentioned, I didn't have to give a reason if I didn't want to. One of the things that was, I suppose, appealing to me, that if I did decide to withdraw, that there would be no consequences to myself and any of my ongoing or further treatment. Because that was a bit of a concern, that if anything that I pulled out of the trial for any reason, would that affect my treatment? And that was clearly explained that there was no consequences there. It was also clearly explained that there may or would be additional appointments, as both Dish and Marion have mentioned, and that was really about due to the strict controls that the trials must comply with. It wasn't a sell, so I didn't feel like I was being told anything. It was really just to sort of say if I wanted to participate or not. So my sort of initial thoughts, I was very nervous and apprehensive. However, I was also excited. I was concerned to ensure that I would receive the best care available, and it was clearly explained that regardless of if I wanted to participate or not, that I would always get the best possible care. So I knew that if I did participate, it wouldn't jeopardise my treatment at all. It was important for me to understand the reason for the trial. So I was wanting to establish what the benefits of the trial would actually produce. And that was really important for me. Benefits for me, but also for future patients, cancer patients. Even if it didn't help me, that if it could help others in the future, it was, I think, a big benefit. And I was also really mindful that other people previous to me going on to a trial had actually done trials. And so the care that I was about to receive was as a result of those previous trials. So I conducted my own research with my own GP and other medical professionals just to gain their expert understanding, their opinion, and also any potential risks and or benefits that may arise from the trial. It was important for me to understand that the trial was actually ethical and morally okay and sound, and also whether the treatment options were considered best practice. It was also looking at any potential risks and any unintended consequences of participating in the trial. During the trial, I had a case manager who was appointed, as Marion was mentioning before, and I was fortunate in the sense that they actually coordinated everything. So they organised the appointments, the surveys. During the trial period, they kept me informed and explained what the next steps in the trial were. So it was pretty clear what I had to do, if you like, and participate. As mentioned, there were additional appointments and extra medical checks during the trial, but I took that as a blessing to know that the treatment I was receiving was still the best case, and in case anything further had come up, that I was being examined during that time. So I was covering all bases for myself. At the end of the trial, I expected to be informed of the results and outcomes. However, my own experience, I didn't receive that, so it didn't really meet my expectations. And so I wasn't really given the feedback or acknowledgement that the 5 years had completed. It just sort of finished, and there was no sort of fanfare or, you know, popping the champagne, so to speak. So one of the things I would really recommend that you establish what will happen at the end of the trial, how you will be advised of the outcome or the results, what the results of the trial actually mean for further treatment, and any other questions or queries that you have. Clearly find that out so then you are aware of what's going to happen at the end. Some of my, I suppose, recommendations about participating in a trial is really have assurance that medical trials have to undergo stringent and ethical and moral standards. Both Dish and Marion have mentioned about the consent form. I can't remember it being that lengthy, but I could imagine it would be fairly lengthy. but that's just because they have to make sure that they cover all the bases and make sure everything is okay. Know that the trial participation is completely voluntary and that there is no obligation to partake and that you can withdraw at any time. Determine how you will be supported and what is expected of you. With the trials, I know it was really emphasised to me that appointments could only be made on certain days. And so factor all those things into it when you sort of do consider participating or not. Ensure you have a clear understanding of while the trial is being conducted. As I mentioned before about what the potential benefits are, any feedback, how that will be actually given back to yourself, what happens at the end of the trial, understanding that the trial can go for a number of years. My own trial was for 5 years, so yeah, it's a fairly long time. And just for myself, I just want to sort of conclude that acknowledge the incredible medical advancements that have been obtained through clinical trials, the work that the Cancer Council of Victoria perform and the medical trial doctors and participants, and I feel extremely privileged to be involved in this webinar tonight. So thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Marion, and thank you, Dish. That brings us to the end of our formal webinar presentation. However, we will now have a short panel discussion where our speakers will each answer some of the questions that you submitted when you registered for the webinar. And the first question is for you, Dish, and that is, how can people living in regional, rural or remote parts of Victoria access clinical trials?
So I think Marion spoke briefly about this already, and I'd just like to echo what Marion said and build on that. So this is the idea that the regional centres, a number of them have now very significant trials units and are running a large number of clinical trials. Now, these are obviously the big centres, so they're places like Albury, Ballarat, Bendigo, but, you know, Warrnambool's now built up a very significant trial centre as well. And so we would really encourage people to try and visit those regional centres first, the closest regional centre. It's also important to understand that those fair-sized regional centres have very strong links to the city centres such as Peter Mac. So, and in fact, we're participating in a program at the moment with some of the regional centres looking at how we could try and reduce the burden on patients of visits by using technologies such as teleconferencing and telehealth, basically. So certainly the first step should be to consider those big regional centres rather than thinking, look, I need to make an appointment to go into Peter Mac in the city.
Thank you. And as Marion mentioned earlier as well, is that there are some trials where patients can be offered support to their travel or accommodation, so it's worth asking that question as well. Is that something you'd agree with, Dish?
Absolutely, yes, of course.
We now have a second question, which I'll pass over to you, Peter. Our audience today would like to know how patients and their families could access information about clinical trials without jumping straight onto Dr. Google. Could you please explain how you sourced information either online or via networks when you first got asked to participate in a clinical trial?
Yeah, sure. One of the things I did was take all the information away and in my own time and space, have a read through it. I think both Marion and Dish have mentioned about marking anything that I was unsure of. Then I had a consultation with my GP and went through the medical trial, what it involved, what my participation would be, what the trial was for, and to see if he could sort of either recommend it or not, and to get his views. I had a really good relationship with my GP, and I was fortunate I've got a good friend who's a GP as well, so I had a really good discussion with him and sort of got his views on it. I tried to steer away from Dr. Google, only because of the conflicting information that you can get. And I'm a big believer that some of the stuff that is out there may not be the best. So it was really for myself, it was on my journey of cancer and going through that treatment, and I wanted to sort of stick with the professionals. rather than sort of people that weren't really, who I wasn't sure of their credentials. Yeah.
And Peter, I know that you're a volunteer in Cancer Connect and Trial Connect here at Cancer Council Victoria. Do you think that there's benefit in talking to people who have also been experienced or had similar experiences in a clinical trial or similar diagnoses?
Very much so. I was really fortunate when I was diagnosed that I actually contacted the Cancer Council of Victoria, and I was a participant of the Cancer Connect program. The Cancer Connect program is where they link you up with somebody who has had a similar cancer or like cancer before. And I know for myself, through that initial part, if you like, of treatment, being able to speak to somebody with a similar cancer was extremely beneficial for me. And I sort of vowed to myself that once I got through it, I would then become a volunteer with the Cancer Connect program. And been really fortunate to have gone through a medical trial, and now with the Cancer Trial Connect, pilot or program, to be sort of participant in that. Yeah.
Great. And our final question before we hear the final thoughts from our speakers today is for you, Marion. If someone was to go on a trial and discover that the arm they were assigned to wasn't necessarily the arm that they wanted, would this affect their ongoing care or their ability to join other trials in future?
So I think to some extent, Dish talked a little bit about this when he was talking about what placebo means. So I'm going to actually take it as two questions, or two parts of the questions. And the first part is very dear to my heart because I get asked this a lot. People often ring us at the hospital and say, I want to get whatever the latest, immunotherapies or something they've heard about in the newspaper or on a news report. And that might be offered in a clinical trial versus the best standard of care. And people frequently believe that we already know that the new treatment is better than our best standard of care. If we did know that, it would be completely unethical to run a trial. And the whole point of running the trials is we don't know that. A new trial may have promise, but I am very old and I've been in trials for a very long time, and I can count, I need to take off my shoes many times to count the number of times I've seen trials where standard of care has come out better than the new treatment, or even placebo treatments. We have lots of examples where being on the placebo arm was actually better than anything else. So we don't know the best arm, and we try to make sure that people do understand that they might have come onto a trial, or they might be asking about a trial because they want a particular drug. But the whole point of the trial is to try and find the best treatment for them. So, but I do understand that people do have that feeling. No, it will not affect your care if you choose to come off a trial because you didn't get the and it won't affect your ability to join other trials in the future. So that's, in answer to the question, it's no and no, it won't. But I think having a good understanding, and that's part of that discussion that you have with your doctor and the study team at the beginning, of what is this trial really about and what is the purpose of it, will help you understand that even if maybe you wanted immunotherapy and you don't get it, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Because the outcome of the trial isn't decided until we've done the whole trial. And I suppose listening to Peter's talk, I'm very stressed on Peter's behalf that he wasn't told the outcome of his trial at the end of 5 years. Now, we don't know the outcome often at the end of the 5 years, but we will ultimately know the outcome. And one of the things we should always make sure that all patients know is, do they want a copy of the report when it's published? Or if in the sad situation where maybe they are no longer with us, do their family want a report? And many patients love their families to know that they participated in a trial and here's the report that they participated in. And so I think it is absolutely crucial that we always give the result of trials, either to the patient who is involved or their families, wherever possible. But it may take 3, 4, even 5 years to have that report published because they're very complex things, trials. but no matter how long it takes, it should get to the patient.
Thank you. So we are now at that point where I'm going to ask each of our presenters to give us their final thoughts. I think in listening to you all today, the biggest message is to make sure that you understand and you speak with your doctor about clinical trials and what's involved and whether they're the option for you. And I hope that our listeners tonight have been able to gain a little bit of a better understanding about what clinical trials are and why they're important in cancer care. But I will ask each of you to provide, I guess, one final piece of advice for the people that are listening and are potentially considering participation in a clinical trial. What would that be? And I'll pass to you first, Dish.
So I'd say if you think you're suitable for a clinical trial and you look at the documentation and the trials team agree that you are suitable, I think the key question is, are you willing to take that risk of the side effects or the potential things that could happen in the trial? And if you are willing to take the risk, I would say absolutely go for it. Because, as Peter said, and I think, it's a great example, we do sometimes get unexpectedly amazing results from trials as well. We do sometimes get terrible side effects, unexpected ones that can be quite harmful, but we do get miracles happening as well. So I would certainly say consider the risks, think about whether it's right for you, but if that's all the case, just go for it. The other thing I'd like to just say is that the work that the Cancer Council do, as Peter has also said, is absolutely amazing, and the support that's been provided to clinical trials in the hospitals I work in is absolutely vital in terms of being able to support patients, but really in terms of us also being able to do more clinical trials and expand them to more patients. So I think that's really important to acknowledge, that the Cancer Council's work in this area is so important.
Thanks, Dish. Peter?
Yeah, I was just remembering when Marion was saying about wanting to choose what part of the trial, if you like. And it was something that I had forgotten, that I remember when they were discussing the different parts, if you like, or different streams you could possibly go on, that I was secretly wanting to go down one stream, thinking that may have had the better results. But I went on the other stream, which that was out of my control. So I think it was just more in my own head, even though I'd agreed to it, I was hoping to go down one path. But yeah. Just getting back to this, I think the information that both Dish and Marion have explained from sort of the practitioner side, if you like, has been extremely informative. From my own perspective, I can only give you my own experience. If you have an opportunity to participate in a trial, I think go for it. Absolutely, I would recommend it. Yeah.
Great, and lucky last.
So I would say, I think the message I'd like to say is everything we do in cancer care today, as Dish said, is based on trials that have previously been run. And the longer you stay in trials in the health service, and particularly in cancer care, the more you see what was the trial 5 years ago being standard of care. And our whole aim is to make standard of care better for everybody. And the mantra that trial medicine is good medicine cannot be underestimated. So I would say, like our Peter and Dish, if you're offered a trial and you're willing to have the extra commitment, go for it.
And that's a wrap for today's webinar, or the formal component anyway. I think that you'll all agree, hopefully, that it has been incredibly useful and hopefully has contributed to your thinking about clinical trials.